All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Artist Talk. This event is part of a series of Artist Talks and Conversations sponsored by the Division of Arts and Letters and the Center for Student Engagement and Intercultural Programs at Governors State University. I'd like to start by introducing our guests tonight. Karen Kunc is renowned in the world of woodcut printmaking and book arts, both as an artist and a teacher. She has faculty emeritus status at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, where she has taught since 1983. And in 2013, she founded Constellation Studios, a professional studio in downtown Lincoln dedicated to traditional and innovative print, paper, and bookmaking techniques. Heather Cox, you may know, is a current MFA candidate in printmaking here at GSU and recently completed a summer internship at Constellation Studios. Karen and Heather are each going to share a little bit about what they do, their work, some of the activities and projects that take place at Constellation Studios, and anything else that they'd like to share with us tonight. And then we're going to open it up for a broader conversation and Q&A at the end. So Karen, we'll start with you. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for this opportunity to kind of talk about Constellation Studios in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it was so great to have Heather here this summer, and she can explain her experience. So it was really a nice event. So what I'm going to do is do a quickie slideshow about Constellation Studios and explain the constellation metaphor. Let's see if this works. All right. Ignore the screen and all how busy it is, but let's see. All right, now you can see my PowerPoint. Some great images about what I'm alluding to when I came up with the name of Constellation Studios. I've certainly had studios all around wherever I've lived in different places and over many years, including garages that had wood burning stoves in it, basements, upstairs bedrooms, buildings that needed to be renovated, and always that dream of having your own studio, which I know everybody has that in the back of their mind too. It's been a way that I've needed to continue to work. It enables me to work. Certainly I can use the facilities at school, but it ends up becoming in conflict with all the other students. So I've had a studio at home and out in the country. Now I'm living in Lincoln and have the studio here. Of course, I work alone in the studio often, and that's a really important kind of immersion that you need to have in your own space. But I've been able to work in lots of different locations all around the world because of the teaching that's led me out for traveling or teaching workshops or leading students. I've actually had it as my goal that I can teach, that I can work anywhere. I'm very portable, and I've even had to print totally by hand when I had no access to a press. But being able to print in all these different locations always gives me some kind of influence as well. Here I'm teaching a workshop in Finland. That's the lower image. And on the right is a workshop in Mexico. And that big wood block was being carved at the Venice printmaking workshop, which no longer exists. And then this world experience that happens with teaching in all these locations, it's wonderful for me. I've enjoyed that experience, but it actually meant that I was enriching other people's environments and almost neglecting my own at home. Of course, I was at the university and teaching there, but I could see the kind of energy that I was making in all these different places among different artists. So here you again see all these wonderful exotic locations, Egypt and Bangladesh and Japan. And all around the country, I've taught at different studios and different communities and always wonder where's the community for me at my own home. So I've had this in the back of my mind for years and years that it would be great to buy a building, a storefront building, and make a studio with all my equipment in one location. Constellation Studios was this building that was cheap and on the edge of downtown that needed to be renovated. It's in a neighborhood that's in mixed transitional stages right now. And the building still has lots of renovations yet to come that I'm working on, but it enabled me to work in to develop a business plan and to focus ideas more formally about what I'm doing with having a physical space that's not the university, but it's my own and not my own personal studio. So I had to develop all the stuff that it takes to get a big loan. And I talked to everybody in town and tried to get them to understand what it was I was doing for developing this business. So while the building was being renovated, they gutted it and started from scratch on the inside. I worked on the outside and created this large mural because it was just demanding this big empty wall that was at the gateway to downtown. It really needed some sprucing up, and this imagery certainly was lively and it attracts a lot of attention. And it was really fun to do, getting up on that scissors lift or scaffolding and painting. This is the biggest painting I've ever made, and I'm not a painter. The building is designed by an architect, so it made use of the space in an efficient way, efficient with all these storage cabinets and shelves, which was really wonderful because it helps to solve some of the problems I was having with everything scattered all over the place. It's a beautiful facility that has gallery space, and here's the finished mural. So I'm going to go back. So having all the facilities and my printmaking facilities here in a central location is kind of the goal of it. But I make and generate my ideas by a lot of doodling. And starting from little sketches, actually, some of these look like they could have come right off the mural. The mural, does it look like a woodblock print or does it look like a painting? It kind of carries all of my vocabulary of shapes and mark making. So and I'm interested in this graphic impact of the sketches that I generate, all very small scale. And in the woodblock field, you have to understand the two streams of art history. One is the German Expressionist Western way, which you can see in this print by Ernest Ludwig Kirchner, the gashing, cutting, tool marks, the energy of the carving. And then on the other side, you see the Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints that are so beloved by everybody, and that elegance of the color and registration and delicacy of blending of colors. So I actually think my work is a cross-fertilization of both of those themes. And of course, wood has always been part of a content issue that I've addressed because I'm working on wood. I'm using a woodblock print, something that was once alive, and now I'm transforming it into something more functional for art making, and almost using something that was dead and bringing it back to life with the printing that I do. So here's some prints that actually use imagery from nature, from the tree branches growing and suggesting all kinds of forces that are shaping these natural forms. Kind of square and geometric on one side, and then organic and fluid on the other. So you can imagine I'm alluding to either trimming and pruning and men affected, and the others are affected just freely by nature. So that's been an abiding interest of mine, is how the wood works. And then paper has been a very strong interest because I print on interesting papers. And early on, I chose papers for their qualities of character and inclusions and weight and translucency. Largely, I use Japanese papers, and they have all kinds of interesting characteristics, sort of like the natural thing that you see from the paper wasp nest. So here at Constellation Studios, I'm able to use the studio to make handmade paper. I can never make enough for my own needs to substitute for what I can buy, and I'd rather support those experts who are making all that beautiful paper. But I do love to make my own, and it gives me fodder for experimenting or for artist books or something like that. But so paper and wood are these two complementary directions that the material is actually influencing the ideas that I think about. And then have always been really interested in illuminated manuscripts, the historical treasures that are preserved in museums and libraries that are so embellished and decorative and beautiful and over the top decorative, actually. So, and I always wanted to make my own artist books, and even started that when I was in graduate school. So it means another thread that comes through that I'm interested in hosting here at Constellation, the idea that I can make books from scratch. I use my own handmade paper, do all the interesting bookbinding and making of covers. It's really a way for me to make a sculptural work. And I'm not a sculptor, but it has a historical sense of three-dimensionality and tactile quality. You're holding this object in your hand. So bookmaking has been a really strong parallel interest of mine. So these are another constellation factor that goes into why the studio is doing all of these things. I've always called my own artist books, way back when I was in graduate school, they're published by me, but I have a press name that's called Blue Heron Press. And years ago, I found this beautiful Blue Heron printer's cut that I've adopted and used in all of my artist books as a kind of an emblem, a signature, an alternative authentication form. And but the Blue Heron always means to me the idea of being lucky. You're standing in the right place, looking over your shoulder just at the right moment that a blue heron flies in front of the full moon. And that's actually happened. And I think that's the same way making my art is. It's all these little decisions and steps that all come together and end up making things come to fruition and to a new place that I don't even know that I can do. So here's some good images of the studio. It's basically the 3,000 square foot on the main floor, and then there's a full basement, so another 3,000 square foot. I have bookmaking studio in the basement and letterpress type collection. My printing presses are on the main floor, and paper making is downstairs, if I said that. There's a lot of interesting details in the studio. Heather probably has images of those things, lots of things to take care of and be aware of. Eventually, I might use all of these things, but it's things that I've accumulated over many years, always with something in the back of my mind that these will be important for students to see, to share, to use. And I'm kind of a good collector. I have to find these things. I've taught workshops at Constellation Studios. That's one of the other facets that is really important for me, to be able to bring other people in the studio and use the facilities along with me, or for a teaching session. It gives me an opportunity to teach in a different way than at the university. There you are always having to push people along and give them a grade and do all that hard stuff. Here people come because they want to, and I always encounter that kind of experience with teaching these workshops. So I'm aware of both directions and the creative impulse that I can foster. So here you see some of the spaces, doing marbling, doing the handmade paper. We've had kid workshops making monster faces, and students have come and helped me with projects, and other interns as well over the years. And then I have artists in residence coming, and that's been a really important facet to have artists who need that time themselves away from their normal life to come to the studio, and they come for 2 weeks or 1 week, or some people have been here a month, especially the international people have, like the artists from Japan. So that's been wonderful to have all these people come and share the space. And at times it's really quiet, and I want people here, and sometimes there's too many and they have to leave, and then I enjoy the silence. It's a real balance of how things are working. It's been a little bit quiet because of pandemic time. I haven't scheduled a whole lot of things, and some things are kind of on hold until I find out if it's something I want to take up again, such as this publishing projects. I invited a couple artists to come, and I served as the master printer, and we made beautiful prints for them. The artists used their prints, but my share of the edition was supposed to cover the costs, and I haven't been able to sell any of them. So it's a mixed blessing to do. And then the exhibitions have really been fascinating to do, to be a curator and have the opportunity to invite artists to come, to send their work. Sometimes they're not coming at all. I'm thinking on a national and even international level, if I'm asking people to send their works here, I'm making exhibitions that are of a significant range here in Lincoln. Not that a lot of people are coming by to see it, but just knowing that this is a possibility here is something that I'm trying to get a track record for. And it's been wonderful to have artists do a residency, and then they did an exhibition. They actually made a room-size yurt inside of the gallery. It's so big. We've done collaboration projects, inviting artists to send a piece to make a huge accordion fold book. We had about 250 artists from all over the country take part in that, and made a really fantastic exhibition that got to exchange. And so we were able to actually take that artist book to Venice, Italy, and show it there as well. So I'm thinking of Constellation Studio really as a way to enhance my role as an artist and teacher. I knew when I retired, I wasn't going to want to sit back. I still want to be active. This is going to keep me active in the future and foster the next generation, something that is not here in Lincoln yet. Chicago has several artist collaborative print studios. This hasn't happened in Lincoln, and so I'm making it happen now while I can, and while I still have all this energy and bringing people to enrich my own community. And of course, I'm using the studio for making my own work. And it's a fantastic place for me to be. And you're all welcome and invited. I think that's what was so surprising when Heather, out of the blue, took a big chance and asked about coming. So thank you. That was kind of a good overview of why it's called these constellation parts that are all intertwined in different facets of my interests. Okay, maybe that's enough.
Unmute myself here. That's great. Thank you, Karen. So next we'll hear from Heather, who's going to talk a little bit about her experience during her summer internship and how it may have informed her own recent explorations in printmaking. Heather, you have the floor. Let me, let's see, pin you to the view here. All right.
Okay, are you seeing the screen? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about the program at GSU, because I feel like there are some, because it's so new, because it's a brand new program as of like 4 years ago, there are a lot of people that don't really know what entails everything into the MFA program. So MFA program is normally a 3-year program if you are really kind of just full speed ahead. I'm doing the 4-year program because I was able to stretch things out a little bit. Through that, there's a lot of different coursework that goes with it. So this includes an internship. So the internship is something that the student seeks out by themselves. And that's what I did with this particular internship. So you don't really have a whole lot of rules except for you need to have 100 hours somewhere. So that can be with a professional artist, that can be at a gallery. It's kind of up to you. So I knew that moving forward in my MFA that I really wanted to get the most out of this experience. So being kind of like still in pandemic times, I took a chance and I emailed Karen, and it was wonderful. From the second I emailed her, she emailed me right back, like welcoming me and saying, let's have an interview. So it went from those very professional stages of interview over Zoom. I had to fill out an application, and it's all done by the MFA student. What also goes into an MFA program at GSU is a thesis paper that I will be finishing up in June, like the end of the summer, and then also a solo show. So that solo show will be a full gallery of my work. So I laugh when I say this, and I'm sure that Karen probably understands this too. It's like whenever I would say, oh, I'm going to this great internship, it's going to be, with Karen Kunc, and they're like, wait, where is it? I said, it's in Nebraska. And they're like, what's in Nebraska? And it's really just this beautiful hidden gem in Nebraska, as you've seen from Karen's presentation. When I got there, this is exactly what I pulled up to, her amazing mural. And then that's just a close-up view of one of the presses that she has. So tasks as an intern is a little, it's 100 hours. It's 100 hours of work, and you immerse yourself in all the things. So it's everything from what you see in this picture with organizing shelves to being able to cover the book covers for Karen. So I was helping with editions for books, which is similar to an edition with prints. So if you're editioning prints, you're making several prints of the same type of image. Karen's making several books that are the same. So I had the firsthand experience of helping her create her books, which was really fantastic. And then there were those other kind of tasks where Karen had mentioned some of her items that she's collected over the years. I was cleaning off these beautiful brayers that she's had for a really long time, and they really just become their own beautiful, almost antique piece. And then there's the letter type that I had to take all the pieces out and then, transfer everything into a new tray. As well as being inspired while I was sorting out her books. So I had the task of cleaning out a file cabinet and then rehoming all of the books that were kind of misplaced over time. Karen shared with me that she would, when she goes places, her books over the years that she's created, she brings those with. So I labeled everything and got everything back in order. But with that, it was, those really special moments where you get to share by yourself with someone like Karen's work. And she was very wonderful with letting me look at the different work that she's had over time. There's some that's special that you don't touch, but then there's also some that she allows you to, look and learn. And that I think is one of the most special things about being there. Was that Karen was just so transparent and so wonderful about sharing everything, really. So me experimenting and exploring at Constellation Studios, just kind of a funny picture of me. You're seeing behind me some of the work that was there at the time. And those were dry point punchings that were done by one of Karen's former students. So there was also a First Friday talk that happened as well while I was there that I got to experience. So behind me you're seeing all of my brayers and tools and things that I'm just getting to play around with. Some calligraph plates, and this was my first initial thing that I brought with me, thinking these would be some easy things for me to use and kind of compile. I'm now going back to those now to layer onto them some of the things that I've learned, but as sometimes when you explore and you experiment, you realize that maybe that's not what you should be doing right in that moment, and you move on to something else. And here you see me pulling a print with Karen, and this was after me experimenting with Japanese paper versus Western paper. I'd never used Japanese paper before and quickly fell in love with just how soft it is, how it almost is like a fabric, if you will. And then I was using Kua inks, and the Kua inks were new to me. They're soy-based inks, and they are just eco-friendly and just something new for me to try while I was there. And that was great too, because all those things were there for me to use. So I was able to try the Akua inks, you know, and not have to like purchase like a whole set of them if I didn't want to. Which brings me to paper making. So Karen was talking about paper making, and I fell in love very fast with paper making. So this is a Hollander beater. The only thing I ever knew about paper making was using a blender. That is, you know, last resort kind of thing, I guess. But I mean, it works if you have it. This though is a whole day experience. You get up early, you beat the cotton in the linters. There's this whole process that goes on. There's measuring, you know, recipes. It really is just an art in itself. So I got to experience this. Here's some pigmented pulp that I mixed some color together, and that's what you see in the bucket. And then there was about, I think, 5 of those buckets. So you can imagine that's like an all-day process. Karen has an assistant there named Kyle, who was very kind to come in and help me throughout the day to do this. And then you see me, like where the paper making tray is, that's me pouring the pulp into a decal box. And then there's going to be some funny pictures as we continue on. So there was a resident there when I was there. Her name's Raluca, and she was kind enough to take some candid pictures of me as I was doing some of these things. So this is kuching the paper, which literally means putting it to bed. And after you take this paper pulp and put it between the different pieces of fabric, then you can see kind of a press next to it. So it's a very like physical thing too, like you're using your whole body when you're creating the paper. So the final results on the left is the wet paper beforehand, and then all of this gorgeous paper that you see on the other side that was made. I still have yet to use all of it, but I definitely want to make some pieces with the paper that I created. So bookmaking, I have a whole new respect for bookmaking and what goes into bookmaking. This particular book was just a simple Coptic stitch. I had a video that I unsuccessfully was able to download, but you're seeing just some of the pieces here, and then the finished product. So the stitching, you know, can take quite some time, and Karen was very wonderful and went through all the steps with me for that too. And then one of the main reasons, you know, that I took a chance to email Karen was you know, I've always loved her work. Like when I first started in the grad program at GSU, Gretchen Jankowski had said, "Oh, have you looked at Karen Kunc's work?" And the second I did, I said, "Oh, I can see why," because I love those transparent layers. I love experimenting, you know, with what happens between those layers. So to have the opportunity to work side by side with Karen was really fantastic. You're looking at some of those inks that I mixed with all the different components that Karen showed me to do. And then she's using some stencils there on the right-hand side. So then this is some of the experimenting that I did while I was there. And it was really just me immersing myself in kind of her ways in the process. So I was using 2 blacks, reducing as I was going, also using some stencils as well. And let's see. So, and then that's another picture of me making an addition. So then you see the 6 different types of prints that I created using litho ink. And then also, like, in between each one, it was really just, and still my work is really about, you know, that play and kind of finding that formula, if you will, that works for the artist. Some of my other adventures while I was there is I went to the quilting museum that Karen had recommended, and they had a wonderful exhibit there at the time. And that's just a lady that's looking at the quilts. You can see how large they are. And then as Karen mentioned, they have she has lots of workshops that are going on, you know, when it's not crazy pandemic. So we had like just some eco printing. I'm not really quite sure how we say that, but that's one of the prints that I created. And then that month went pretty quickly. This is Karen's wonderful dog, Coco, that is, you know, very much a part of the studio. And I feel like all studios should have a, you know, a sweet dog, right? So that's all I have for my experience.
Great.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you, Karen, as well, for sharing some of your work, sharing the studio space with us and some of the different processes that you all worked through and learned over the summer. We have some time now for Q&A. So if anyone in the audience would like to either make a comment or ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand or type it into the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that. And in the meantime, I thought maybe I could just kind of kickstart the conversation by asking you both about your thoughts on the value of experimentation in art, since that seems to play a pretty important role in both of your methods and processes.
Well, I think experimentation maybe actually works when there's a solid grounding. If you know some of the basics at the beginning, this is a perennial discussion in printmaking. Should everybody learn all the basics first and then go off and experiment? Or should they not know anything and just jump in and try something crazy? Well, in printmaking, you could ruin a lot of things, including presses and equipment, and there's actually a lot of experience that helps with the experimentation, because then you learn how things go. And while you're working, while the time is being spent, things occur to you mentally, and processes start arising. And there's always that question of, well, what if I try this? And what if I try that? And I always equate it very much like a scientist. You know, they have to test one little thing, one little variable. It's not a dramatic change, but those little variables all have an input into everything. So that may be the actual level of experimentation that's happening. Then things go crazier, and artists figure out a way that's unique to them. And maybe that's always what we're searching for, is some kind of a direction and experimentation. But I think it helps to have a grounding so that you have something to push off of, and to push off on the parameters of technique, but also on the rules and the the reasons things developed over time. And we know humans have always experimented and developed things for thousands of years. So it's part of our nature.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to say too that, I mean, ultimately it, you know, it creates, you have this, the outcome is the knowledge that you get, you know, after the experimentation. And sometimes that knowledge is that you just do away with whatever you're doing. And sometimes that knowledge is that you move towards, you know, towards that, and you just keep moving in that same direction. And it also, I think, has a way of giving you your own artistic voice and your own language within that.
Heather, was there something in particular that you discovered through experimentation, maybe over the summer, or just kind of, I know you've been doing a lot of experimenting already this fall. Anything that kind of stands out in your memory as something that was particularly kind of like mind-blowing or, you know, kind of a breakthrough for you?
Yeah, and I know I shared this with Karen too. You know, it's having, like she was saying, having that, you know, base knowledge. I almost felt like it was that missing piece. Like when I worked with her and we started using some of this transparency and using it, you know, in a way that she knows works. I don't use the same exact type of ink right now. I've been experimenting with screen printing in the same way, but using these same kind of shapes that have come out in my work, and what happens when I'm using these transparent layers versus opaque layers on a larger scale, and, you know, in Japanese paper. Like, I just don't know if I can go back. Like, it's just one of those things that is really quite lovely. And it's wonderful because it's, I've been experimenting with using the back of the paper too, and whether that's going to go into my own experiments with accordion books, I don't know. But maybe even just, you know, just seeing that the image behind it, even when it's just on display when you're looking at the piece, there's some neat things that start to happen.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I've made work for many, many years already, and I have developed a style, a way that my work looks. I can't help it. I'm really lucky that way, actually. And people could assume that I've run into a formula for how it's made and how the images are developed. I actually think that being formulaic is my biggest fear. I don't want to be pigeonholed into one thing, one direction, but it means within what I've chosen, there's so much room yet for me to experiment and explore and test. It could be about just the imagery or the ideas. Every time I start something, I'm nervous because I don't know if it's going to work. And there is still in me a level of challenge that I have to put into every design that I select. I pick the hardest one, or the one I don't know how I'm going to do, so that even in the process, it becomes a challenge. So that I'm finding that's my way to experiment and to explore and challenge. But I don't really need to suddenly become a massive bronze sculptor to experiment. That doesn't interest me. And I'm not really that interested in the digital technology stuff. So I have these two hands that are pretty facile to do anything I want. So I can still have the challenge for myself.
Right. Yeah, I think it can be a delicate balance sometimes between having your unique artistic voice and also leaving room for yourself to kind of play and experiment and grow as an artist. I think we often look at artists who are established in their careers and we say, oh, geez, they really have it figured out. You know, they have their signature style, and what we might not see is all the work that goes into that growth and development over the years. I don't see any questions yet from the chat box. Again, please do feel free to drop those in. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue asking questions. So my next question is about the value of internships. I mean, you both kind of discussed a little bit about the role of mentorship on both sides of that exchange, especially for emerging artists. I'm kind of curious about your take on that.
Right. I guess I can go first. For me, it was just this whole new, like this bigger art world that I saw. You know, I was immersed with so many different people, like from residents to people that were in their own graduate program in Nebraska, and they were wonderful with even writing things down for me. So it was a constant, like, bigger community. You know, it's this small community that we have at GSU, but to be able to branch off and then have this other, like, larger community and seeing where I can go from this point on. You know, is there another residency that I could do in the future? And you know, I've heard from other artists, not in Nebraska, but just like, is the residency thing the way to do it? Like, do you need to be doing these other residencies? You know, that's an opinion that some artists have. I say that all those different residencies and experiences and different places that you're going, it helps you grow, right? Like, it's a really great thing. And just to see how Constellation Studios, how Karen runs it, you know, the things, the obstacles that she's had along the way that she shared with me, the things that have worked, the space, and, you know, almost like the dreamer in you kind of comes out a little bit, you know, like, oh, like Karen was at this place one time when she was, you know, younger and working out of her garage, and, you know, look at her now. Like, it's really a special place. You get to have the moments of, you know, this is kind of the nitty gritty stuff you have to do, the cleaning and the this, and then here's this special experience that you get to share with an artist that has been doing this for a very long time.
Well, I think it's been wonderful to have interns. I should have done a number count, how many I've had here at the studio over the 8 years that I've been open. Even when I didn't have this studio, the university has, they call them UCare students that actually work as an intern with faculty. So I've been fortunate to have students help me with my work over the years, and I'm fine if nobody's there to help. I can keep going, but it is a really interesting, special relationship. And I also know that out in the bigger world, there's places where our interns kind of considered free labor, and they don't like that idea. And it might be in other fields where they're much more taken advantage of. I think it was I like it to be a pretty equal sharing. Somebody's helping me, but I'm giving a lot of information too. And they're going along for the ride with all the stuff that I'm doing professionally. But other places, you hear stories of interns just laboring and they should be paid. And there's discussions about that in different fields. So I think in the arts, it's inevitable that we're sharing things, and it's a very good experience that I would encourage most art students to take advantage of that when they can.
I have a question, Karen. When you were traveling, doing workshops in other places and having students that way, were you invited to do those, or is there a place that you looked and applied? How did that work?
Mostly, I was invited for many of these opportunities. There's probably some at the beginning that I applied to. Some art centers actually are often seeking people to apply for their teaching workshops, like Pyramid Atlantic and the DC area. They accept applications for people to come and teach workshops. And so does the Morgan Morgan Conservatory of Paper in Cleveland. So you might find some that where you can apply. I guess I was really lucky. I got lots of invitations that would come to me, and my policy has always been to say yes. All those years I said yes. Now I may need to say no a little bit. And I may not get the invitations anymore either, but some of them became tied to grants that I got through the university. So that helped get me to certain places. And then you make contacts when you're there also. Some happened in a similar way. I got an out of the blue email from a person in Egypt, and it could have been a scam. And I'm sure lots of people thought it was a scam. I responded and right away. We had a correspondence, and then this wonderful Egyptian artist and his wife came to Lincoln for 2 years. And out of that grew all these connections to Egypt and some of those other international experiences. So it was just lucky out of the blue saying yes to something.
Thank you so much for your question, Sherry. It looks like we have another question in the chat box for Karen and Heather. What heavily influences your pieces?
Heather?
Oh, goodness. Let's see. Right now, I am kind of between things that are influencing my work. Some of it's kind of just by happen chance, like it just kind of happens. And then some of it has been a series of looking at my environment and what's around me and taking from those pieces around me. So making sketches. I mean, I would say as an MFA student, as a BFA student, and Karen, I'm sure you'll agree with this too, because I remember you telling me this, sketch, write, do all of those things because they really are important. I know that professors will say that constantly, and sometimes it gets to be, repetitive, where you're like, oh gosh, again, like I have to sketch, but it's true, constantly be making those marks in your sketchbook and those things that are happening around me. So at the moment, those are kind of the things that I'm kind of just trying to get through. It's one of those times as an artist where it's the beginning of the thesis year and I'm just like really just full steam ahead. I'm in the studio constantly. So come June, I will have a whole artist statement and show that we will all know exactly what my work is about.
Okay, the question was about influences.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I think that I have lots of influences, sort of like Heather is even talking about, the influences from what I see and what I look at and what I continuously look at. I'm immersed in landscape here. That's a big issue. It's always been important for me to get that sense of landscape, but done in an abstract language. And I always say it's lyrical, nature-based abstraction. So there could be the core of something that's out there, but it also very much is a studio invention. I'm sitting in the studio. I'm not out in the landscape drawing or painting the landscape. I'm in the studio thinking about those things. And of course, while I'm out there, I'm taking photographs and everything, but I never go back and specifically refer to those. But they might be inside me somehow, and it comes out in the quirky way that my hand draws. So it's a translation, and that's what I'm looking for in art, is some kind of a translation of the world through the filter of an artist, and how does it come out in a unique personal way that actually needs to be said, so that there's lots of voices saying lots of different things about how the world is with interpretations. Mm-hmm. I don't need to be a photographer and take exactly what's out there. It's already there. So the interpretation is much more interesting to me. So it's nature, actually geometry, pattern, organic versus geometric, those things I play off each other often in my works. And then I can tie that even to man-made and natural, and then that leads to environmental issues and degradation of the landscape and all the potential uses and abuses that we see. Even among my own actions in the garden, if I pull a weed, I'm destroying life, something like that. And those things have occurred to me for years, and I still think about it, and kind of answering some of those big questions about how did this happen? How did we get this way? So I'm still speculating about that through my visual sketches that don't have to say it. It actually says it so much better than I can ever articulate it.
Well said. And I mean, this is such a great question too, because it brings to mind the question of, you know, when you're a student, especially, and you're absorbing all of these different influences, not only from what you're learning about in the classroom, but from your own teachers and mentors. You know, how do you navigate that space where you're trying to learn, but also grow and develop as your own unique individual voice as an artist? It can be a little bit tricky to, you know, resist that temptation to kind of emulate those that you admire, and instead pick and choose selectively what makes sense for you in your own work. So thank you so much for that question. Any other questions from the audience before I draw from my hat over here? So my next question is about, this is kind of a big question. And Karen, you've been in the field for decades now at this point, so I'm really curious what both of your thoughts are on the future of printmaking, maybe kind of informed by what's been happening in recent years, what directions you kind of see materializing at this point.
Well, I usually say that I think printmaking is very healthy, and I'm hoping it is healthy everywhere. I'm sure it has its problems, and always, how do you attract students to something that's so different and hard for them to understand? People don't grow up having an understanding of how printmaking happens. They do with painting, they do with clay, with sculpture, and photography is so dominant in our world now. So printmaking always needs education about it, and to try and draw people in. I think it's very healthy though, because in the last 35 years, there have been these strong printmaking organizations that have annual conferences, seminars, exhibitions, opportunities for members to show. So in essence, the printmakers have made their own world. And we needed to, because the major art world doesn't care very much about printmakers' work. They like prints, but they like prints made by painters, or the famous artists, or the blue chip artists. But by the printmakers, we're kind of always in a little separate class by ourselves. And sometimes I say it's equivalent to being a monk. You've already taken some kind of vow of poverty, but we end up having our own community and making that community really strong and supportive of the young people, giving a voice to people sharing what they're doing. And the conferences are very rich with panel discussions and theoretical pushing of the boundaries and experimental processes and demonstrations of all these amazing things. So I think it's been a very strong way that we've made our own world. And for good or bad, we can do whatever we want because nobody cares. But the prints are being made. There's lots of exchanges happening. And the young people all now have the same vision like I did, to start a collaborative print studio and make the community around you that you want. We're trying to empower people. And this is one way they can make works that have a voice that's easy to send out into the world, to make multiples, to say part of the strong history of printmaking has always been social commentary, and we're in the era of social justice, and here's a way to say it through graphic means, and that's charging up a lot of young people. So I think that's actually very healthy. So I'm quite positive, and all the young students, they all don't know where they're going to go. What are they going to do? Well, we have to learn to be entrepreneurial. That's inherently part of printmaking, because you're making more than one. You got to do something with those things. So it gets out there. It has to get in other people's hands. So it kind of pushes that idea of being entrepreneurial, and let's make an audience, even if it's of each other. It gets broad, and you bring more people into it. So that's my hope for the future too, because I need those people to come here for my Constellation Studios business. It is a business, so I want it to prosper, and I want it to foster other people here.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, like, as a printmaker in a graduate program, I do find myself at times feeling like I have to advocate for myself, right? Because it's like, why would you print that when you can paint that? You know, it's this constant, like, why would you do that? And I like how Karen said that it's, you know, that she thinks it's healthy, because sometimes in my thought process, sometimes that can weigh you down a little bit, like, oh, is it though? Is it? Like, I hope it is. But you're right, we have to be the ones that continue to have places like Karen has, you know, and she mentioned the conference, and there is, the conference is actually in Wisconsin this year in March, which is quite accessible for people who go to GSU, you know, to see the conference at that level, as long as it still ends up going, I think would be really a value, you know, for us to go to that, or whoever can go to that and then come back and share too. So kind of lost my train of thoughts. But, you know, I will say too, like, on the flip side of that, I've seen like during the pandemic, people still figuring out how to print make, even when it's, you know, at their house. So there still is this desire to do it, whether it's, you know, doing it like just hand printing, or creating their own structures that they make. You know, there is a need for it. It's just not, I don't know, always as accessible, or the top class that people are taking, like when you're at a university.
Yeah, it's been phenomenal to watch all this new way of sharing through the video lessons and free classes here, artist talks there. It's really, I don't want to lose some of that. I miss doing it in person, but being able to remotely watch a lecture by Ann Hamilton was wonderful to join in. And then to see the demos where people are doing kitchen lithography, no litho stones, they're printing off of aluminum foil. It's just amazing what invention is happening. So people are being very, very good at figuring things out.
Yeah, if nothing else, the pandemic really kind of forced some accidental experimentation, just trying to figure out, how are we going to make this happen? I mean, just talking to, shout out to our amazing printmaking instructor, Gretchen Jankowski, you know, how do you reconfigure a class on the fly, not knowing what people have at home to work with, that, you know, so have to get obviously very creative. I also like the discussion of the, oh, I'm sorry, Heather, were you
no, I was just gonna say, just to compliment Gretchen too, like, she did too, she did the videos, the step-by-steps, the, you know, everything in between to make that work for us, which was, I mean, it's a lot, you know, to have to do that, and then, you know, doing everything through video. So yeah, kudos to Gretchen for sure.
She says you're making me blush. No, I thought what you had said about conferences too, both of you had kind of touched upon that. I think that's so important in many different fields to just get a sense of what the latest trends are. What's something, you know, you might notice something new and exciting that's happening that you wouldn't be aware of otherwise. And again, the whole like Zoom culture of today makes that so much more accessible to tune into some of these conferences if they have the virtual component. That's where I've been learning a lot about what's going on in my field, for example. So I think that's a really good advice. Cindy has a question in the chat box. She says, how many layers of printmaking is too much, even for the paper? And what was your most layered piece? Ooh, that's a good question.
Oh, goodness. I guess I'll start with that. I mean, for me, it's a matter of kind of that theory of thought, like there's never too many layers, but I don't know. It just depends on what look that you want. And if it gets to be too much, then I say rip it down and use it into a collage piece. That's how I do it. And I don't know. I lose count on the layers. I think they're more successful. You have more successful layering depending on the type of material that you're using and the type of paper that you're using. And then you have some things that, you know, there's so much buildup and it becomes kind of this like plastic look, which also can be kind of endearing depending on what you're going for. So I don't know. I guess maybe somebody would say once the paper rips that it's too much. I'm not sure. But maybe there's something nice about that too, right?
I do think that's a good way of putting it, Heather, is that it depends on the paper. It depends on the print medium. It depends on the ink, which kind, if it's oil-based or water-based or silkscreen or litho, all of those layers can actually present problems. There's something that's even called ink rejection. Yes. If you print too many layers, the paper won't, and the ink layers will not accept something new on top of it. But I've actually seen artists use that to a really unusual effect. Right. So even the problems can become something interesting. For me, in my prints, I don't really, I try not to have any more than maybe 4 or 5 layers, but I use maybe 50 colors in building up that print and finishing it. But I try to put colors in different patches. That's why the stenciling is useful. I can isolate sections and so I put as many colors as I can against the white of the paper. Then I can do reduction from the wood and do more layers on top. But rarely am I ever inking the whole block all at once. That would put too much color down right away. And I'm trying to have colors stay bright and not get muddy. And then have them sit on the paper so that they don't become shiny and too plastic. But I use that effect at times to make little accents that are almost like jewels across the surface of the print. So experiencing the art in person is really what I'm after. It has so many more beautiful qualities in person than it does with a digital image. That only gives maybe a half of the experience of seeing it. The great design is there, the impact of the colors, but it's not like the real thing, which is what I believe is the most important.
Absolutely. Now I'm kind of curious how many layers Cindy has pushed the boundaries with, just out of curiosity. Yeah, it's interesting how certain mediums too, kind of, there's that danger element involved where you kind of are teetering on the edge of possible failure. And yet even in that failure, you can find some really exciting space for, you know, creative solutions. Oh, Cindy says, I only did 13 layers and I regretted it, but it came out good.
Good.
Good result. Nathan has a question. He says, what kind of wood do you typically use for your prints? And do you find that using different kinds creates a different outcome?
Yes. I typically use 1/4 inch birch paneling or birch veneer plywood. regular old birch that you can get at any do-it-yourself place. I only needed 1/4 of an inch thick because I'm not carving really deep. I'm not interested in that deep layer that a lot of artists do like. They like that kind of chatter and texture from the cut marks. And I'm not that interested in that. I like shapes more. So the birch plywood is really accessible. You can get it anywhere. The other kind of wood I've been using a lot of lately is called Baltic birch. And it also comes in 1/4 inch, but it's a real 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or 3/4. And it's birch layers all the way through, not like that thin, inexpensive birch plywood that's some shoddy wood on the inside layers. So the birch plywood, the Baltic birch, carves better, but it's harder because it's birch all the way through. And then many woodblock artists actually like to use Shina plywood, which comes from Japan. And it's imported in only one place in this country, McLean's printmaking supplies near Portland, Oregon. And Shina is actually a basswood, and it carves very easily. It's very soft, but you're right in that different woods give different textures and effects. Shina is so easy to carve, you don't get very much wood grain. I like the birch because I like that even wood grain that you get little white textures everywhere, and it kind of enlivens the surface. It's not flat. The Baltic birch has beautiful wood grain too, but artists even use MFD board and kind of that manufactured glued together stuff. They use masonite pieces. I don't like any of that. I don't like linoleum because it looks plastic. I like the struggle with the wood. And I can't always carve very perfectly in the wood, and it chips out and causes problems, but then it's reacting with me and I'm not controlling it. So that becomes an interesting engagement as well. But people use pine, and that can make interesting wood grain. Luan mahogany also, which is very inexpensive, and it comes in 1/4 inch pieces too, and that has a big open grain. So you can experiment.
Heather, what about you?
Oh.
Do you have a favorite wood to use for?
I thought you were gonna, because Gretchen has another question, so I thought you were going to that. Sorry. A similar. I've just used birch primarily. I was introduced into all of the different types of possibilities of different wood that that Karen had just mentioned. So, in all the notes that I took while I was there, that was one of like the many options of Baltic and pine and all of these different things. I haven't gotten to that point yet. I have the panels. I've started carving some things in those. That's like one of the paths I'm going down, but it's, just typical birch, and I've used Shina too. And that is like carving like butter, when you're using it. So it's quite awesome. But I will say that, what I learned with Karen too is that no matter what type of wood panel that you're using, you have to have like almost this dance or conversation with it, because there is a certain way that you have to carve even little bits, like if it's not working, if it's working against you, then you have to kind of rethink the way that you're carving.
Thank you. Okay, so to Professor Jankowski's question, she says, this question is for you, Karen. When and how did you first get introduced to printmaking, and was relief your first love?
Well, actually, I did 4 years of art in high school. And I think maybe it was that last year of high school, there was a printmaking section. And we did a screen print and a linoleum block and a woodcut, and I loved it. And I thought that was really interesting and challenging, more so than all the other things we'd done. So when I went to the university, I wanted to get into printmaking right away. So sophomore year, I could get into beginning printmaking. And I knew it was for me, the whole making prints. I did as much painting, I did as much ceramics, but printmaking was an area where you could be quiet, but you're working around other people. You didn't even have to talk. And I was very shy. So it was, you're learning stuff just by being around everybody and overhearing things and learning stuff that way. So I wanted to get into printmaking early on, but I didn't really get into doing relief printmaking until my first teaching job at Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio. And they wanted me to teach a relief printmaking class. And I didn't tell them I hadn't done it since high school. I just got the job, and then I did the assignments along with everybody else. And that's when I really fell in love with it. And for my MFA work, I did mostly screen printing and etching, big aquatints that had a lot of burnishing and weird foul biting and all kinds of stuff. And the silkscreen prints were very interesting. They were transparent layers on Japanese paper. And so I think when I started doing the woodcut, I brought in all of these other influences. It's an amalgam of all the other print processes that I did. So I started using stencils on the wood block, stencils like you would use in a silkscreen, and all the selective inking like we were doing on the etching plate. And I saw people doing that. So I adopted things, and teaching it was being challenged. And I think you might all find this true also. After graduate school, it took about 5 years, then a breakthrough happens. So you have to be out of school. Something happens. And that's when my woodcuts really started doing something very unusual and unique, and large size and big marks of color could happen. So it was really exciting.
Speaking of large size, Cindy has a follow-up question. She said, can you print on a wall with printmaking?
Well, you might be able to with a screen print.
Wow.
Print silk screen directly on a wall. And then last year we did a neat project, and there's other printmakers doing wheat pasting onto walls. So they're printing on thin Japanese papers from their wood block or whatever print medium. And then you can put the paper face down on a piece of plastic sheet. And on the back side, you coat it with wheat starch paste, or we used wallpaper paste. And then you take that plastic sheet in your print and you smack it onto the wall and use the plastic and press it onto the wall. And you could use a roller or whatever, but we had it out here on the wall of the building with a project where we wheat pasted 9 different artists' woodblock prints all around the city in different installations. And it lasted almost a year outside. And they were just on inexpensive Japanese paper. And it just was great. And very strong graphic woodblock prints were out there. So that's the way people are doing the printstallations, getting the prints in alternative venues rather than always in a frame, sitting in glass behind the walls.
I'm really surprised that print lasted that long.
Yeah,
that wheat paste, I should say. That's impressive.
It was fun.
I have, maybe this can be our final question because I'm just looking at the clock. I'm kind of curious, not to toot our own Professor Jankowski's horn again or anything, but I think she's done a really great job of creating a warm and inviting atmosphere in the print studio, and just kind of like a lively studio atmosphere. And so I was kind of curious on your thoughts from both the teacher and the student perspective about how you foster that lively, engaging, collaborative studio culture.
Do you,
Well,
go ahead.
Were you ready to say something?
Well, I was just more, are you asking like from my perspective within like being the student, Dr. Becky?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Um, well, let's see. I would say, I don't know, there's, not doctor, Gretchen Jankowski, she has a love of it for herself. And I think that shows through. The fact that she loves it so much and she's consistently, finding the next best thing to teach us, or, what works, and just that feeling of that she cares, I think is really important. And I noticed that with Karen too, when you're at the Constellation Studios, like she had mentioned once, like, I don't want to hover over you, but I want, you to know that basically that this is a community where, you can ask for the help if you need it. And I mean, I asked so many questions, she was probably sick of me by the time I was done. But yeah, I don't think it's always easy to have that type of environment, but I don't know. Maybe we need to pick Gretchen's brain a little bit, because if I'm going to be doing this in the future, then you need to have those under your belt, right?
Well, I'm not sure if I ever did anything specifically to make that happen, other than knowing in the print studio, it kind of is inherent to that process. If people are working together, it creates that lively atmosphere. And that it's great during printmaking classes, because people are there working and they're trying to take advantage of that class time. So that's always fun to see prints being pulled off the press and everybody having a chance to see it right then. And actually, but the problem of the studio in this way is that, yes, your mistakes are going to be visible for everybody else to see. And sometimes people want to be in the studio by themselves because they know they're going to make mistakes and they don't want anybody to see that. That's also a valid kind of experience. But getting over that self-consciousness about mistakes, feeling dumb, asking questions among everybody, and each student teaching the other students, that ends up really helping. And it helps people remember things. I actually think a lot of printmaking is a verbal, oral history. We're telling each other how we were taught, and we're remembering these stories. Some of it's not even ever going to be written in a book. And why should it be? It's better to tell each other, and we're telling this story as it goes along. How to make things, the lore of a technique, the recipes for how to do soft ground or hard ground this way. All of that is, some of us find it really interesting, and I can remember those things. I can't remember song lyrics. I can't remember the plot of movies, but I can remember printmaking things. So it might be a particular gene. And then the other advice that I have about working in the print studio and making that lively atmosphere happen is, if you're having problems and mistakes are happening and you're frustrated, don't clean up. Stay there and solve it. Keep working, work through it. And then other people are around and you get feedback, because you're working and you're staying there, everything's already dirty. So you don't want to get so frustrated and have to come back and get all that stuff out again. It's better to try, and it might just be tweaking the ink. It might be fixing the pressure. Again, remember all the variables that it takes, that you can analyze all those little variables, and then you end up getting over the hump and things start working. Then you get to celebrate with everybody, and suddenly everybody is aware of, oh, this is working, and how that happens. It really is a fantastic feeling.
Right. Yeah, and it really is like just a sense of community that ends up happening over time in the printmaking studio. And it's not that it can't happen in a painting studio, but I've been in both, and I think there is this sense of discovery that Karen was talking about, where everybody had, you know, you pull a print and everybody's kind of just gathered around, and you're there to support each other. You know, I don't think I've ever experienced somebody like just not liking, you know, what I'm doing. There may be suggestions or, you know, in that way, but not like, oh, that's terrible. You know, you may say that, they may be helping you through that, but yeah, it's really something special that happens in the printmaking studio. And I never really thought of it in that way, but it's different. It's a different experience than painting, having your own canvas, and really just being in your own space the whole time.
Yeah, maybe it's just, it's inherent in the medium itself. It's meant to be collaborative. It's meant to be, you know, everybody kind of peeking over one another's shoulders. And I think part of that too is the techniques involved. And there's a level of needing instruction on certain techniques and certain machinery, you know, so that you don't truly mess something up or break something, as Karen alluded to earlier. That just isn't, it's not the same in the painting studio or, you know, drawing or other mediums necessarily. Well, thank you both so much. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Karen?
No.
I was just going to say thank you both so much. This was such a wonderful conversation tonight. I thank you both for joining us and sharing your experiences. And thank you to the audience as well for coming to the event and raising some great questions. I hope you'll be able to join us again next week on October 6th at 6 p.m. for another artist talk with ceramic artist Miwa Neishi. You can stay tuned for some details on the Zoom link coming up. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
This is great. Thank you.